Hello, everyone. I am Attorney John Burris. I'm here with Ben Nessenbaum from my office. We are the lawyers who have today filed a lawsuit against the City of Vallejo and police officer Jared Tong. We filed this lawsuit on the grounds that we believe that Jared Tong violated the civil rights of Mr. Monterossa, violated civil rights by the use of deadly force under circumstances where deadly force was not justified. We also have a lawsuit on behalf of the family members, the mother, father, and the two sisters, on the grounds that their civil rights were also violated under the 14th Amendment in terms of their relationship. This case is very, very disturbing to us in many, many ways, because the shooting took place by an officer who has this history of using deadly force under circumstances that are quite questionable. And in this particular case, the way we have been able to understand it is that the officer was in the back seat of a car and was driving towards behind the Walmart store, and at some point he decides to shoot it 5 times from the back seat of the car through the window. Front window, killing part of that Sean. The disturbing part about that is we don't know what Sean was doing to justify having deadly force. We know that there's no evidence that he attacked the officers, any of them. We know that he did not pull a weapon out on them. We know that he wasn't doing anything maybe other than surrendering by sitting down or on his knees and trying to put his hands up, as was first described by the police chief, or as described by the union, he was in a squatting position. The union tried to suggest he was in a attack position, but think about the logic of that a person would be in a squatting position to attack police officers in a car who are in a position of safety, and he doesn't have a gun or weapon of any kind that would justify it. So we find that to be a remarkably disingenuous statement. And if we listen to the comments made by the officer afterwards, we clearly know that that he was more panicky than reason. And I say that because he has a history, which Ben will go through, of having been involved in 4 shootings within a 3 to 5 year period, all of which he shot someone. They didn't kill him, but he shot him multiple times. We also know that he may very well have been a person who had a mental state, was unstable, because he had seen his nephew or cousin having been killed at another police department. And since he came to this department, he's been involved in 4 shootings. And so we're very, very disturbed by not only that he's still in the department, that he's still on the streets, but engaged in this level of force that was woefully unjustified. Now, there are areas in the case that are very, very troubling to us. We had a chance, at least certainly I did, have a chance to view Sean's body at the morgue or at the funeral home, and had a chance to clearly see that there was a hole in the mid-stomach, mid-chest, and mid-neck area, and that there was another, appeared to be a hole, but bigger and more bruising out of the back side of the head. This was quite disturbing to us because the police chief said that he was shot in the back of the head. And given the way it was described by the officer, that just could not have happened. If it did, it's even worse. That means you shot somebody whose back was to you and was going in a different direction. But even if not, he clearly was not attacking the officers at the time. And under the law, you have to be in imminent danger, fear of your own life, or imminent fear of someone else's life that's there. And we don't have any of those facts. And we know there was no warning. The law and the policy essentially says if you're in a position to give a warning, you're supposed to try to give a warning so the person know that they continue doing something improper, certainly threatening them, deadly force could be used against him. So that clearly wasn't given. So all of you, when you listen to the facts, you can see that this is kind of a panic shooting, and that in such a way that the officer, even after the shooting, could not even describe with certainty that he had seen a weapon of some kind. he even says, and I won't quote from what he basically says, is that, I'm hearing a complaint here. He says frantically after he had done the shooting, "What did he point at us?" The officer who drove the marked police car responded, "I don't know, man." A moment later, defendant Tong then announced, contrary to his own stated position, that likely with the body cam on, that, hey, he pointed a gun at us. Now, how could he point a gun at you later? At least you can describe the gun later, but at the beginning, you didn't know what was pointed at you, if anything. So this is the part of the fabrication that started almost immediately to try to cover it. And then he says, you know, this is fourth shooting. He says, "I'm stupid," or quote, "effing stupid." And then he goes, and this is what I quote effing needs tonight. I thought he had a effing axe, was a gun. And this is after the shooting, after the body had been, unfortunately, Sean had been searched. Inside of his sweater shirt, they found there was an axe with a hammer axe. But that was not out and seen by the officer before he attacked and shot him. And even if he had it, given the distance that he was away, he was not in the car, he was not on top of the car, he was away from the car, which means that the officer had plenty enough time to see what he was doing and react to it and give warnings. But he did not do that. He essentially saw what apparently him moving, going down, and he shot him. It was almost like a wild, like an animal. He's looking through his window, he sees some movement, and he's like a deer hunter. He shoots the moving object. And this is outrageous in terms of us. There was no factual basis to justify using deadly force at the time. And so, the standards, so that you all know, because we're not of a position that police officers cannot use deadly force, because they obviously can. There are circumstances when it's more than justified. But the standard, and why we're here, is because the standard that was not followed. The standard is that of an objectively reasonable police officer under the circumstances. And no objective, reasonable police officer would shoot through a window, a windshield, when that officer is already in a position of safety, is in the car. The car could move. It could move to a different position. And he shoots through the window from the back seat of the car, which means he just saw something and he panicked. And the worst part about it, he had a rifle. He had an AK-15. So what was going on in the city of Vallejo at that night that would justify officers having AK-47, AK-15, semi-automatic assault rifles? So it just seems that this was overly armed by the officer and overly panicked under the circumstances. And I've essentially said that type of conduct, in front of what was in front of him, really, in our view, justifies criminal prosecution. To me, this is flat-out murder. And I don't say that lightly. I say it because there was no basis to do it. And that that whatever Sean was doing, he was not attacking them. And to make matters even worse here, all these officers were equipped with body cams on them. All of them were. And then there were body cams for the cars. What you see is the body cam of the officer who did the shooting as he's looking through the window that he shoots, but you don't see what's going on before he shoots. And you do not have, there's no body cams anywhere that we have been given the opportunity to see that shows what Sean was doing before he got shot. And this is the most critical aspect of everything. What was the kid doing? Did he have anything out that us as reasonable people could say he presented a threat to the officers? And it is shocking and disappointing that videos was before, there's video afterwards, that was released last week that shows all the, unfortunately, the gory details afterwards. How is it you could have that much video immediately thereafter when Sean is suffering and in a very bad way, but not have the video at the time of the shooting takes place? That coupled with, within several days, the police chief had a press conference. We were present at the press conference. And the chief described Sean as moving and then falling to his knees, and as if it was an act of surrender. And he said it was the darnest thing he'd ever seen. And he's lifting his hands up, and the officer shoots him. He couldn't describe why it was that he was being shot, because he clearly did not go for a weapon. He clearly did not have a weapon in his hands. If that's a statement that the chief gives several days later, how did the chief know that? That means either someone told him that who was present, or there's a video that he saw that had those particular visuals in it. In any event, several days later, the police union, all-powerful police union, they then issue a statement that essentially contradicts what the chief had said, that Sean was in a crouched position as if he was about to attack, and he was reaching for his waist. How that is a common refrain by police officers, that they had to reach for his waist. But think about the logic of that. A guy has no weapon that can be of danger to the police officers, and he's running toward them, and he's reaching for his waist, and the police officers have guns, and they're in a car, protected position. It is ridiculous. But at the same time, the unfortunate component of this, within a week or so later, the chief adopts that position. And it is disingenuous, it is hurtful, because it goes to his integrity, but it also goes to the integrity of this investigation. And this is why we have such real problems here in Vallejo with the police union. We have a number of cases that many of you know, but we can't trust what they have to say. And to add insult to injury, you now know that somewhere along the way, the windshield was destroyed by a police person, and the backseat and the car itself was returned to service. And the reason why this is important, because in every case that we're in, we always ask for the preservation of the evidence. In our view, the window was evidence because we needed to see what damage that window had and whether there's any evidentiary value to it. In our case, we have reconstructionists, we have expert witnesses, we have a person who would have looked at that window, that have looked and see what can be seen, and more important is, could you tell where the officer was in the car? Could he see what he claimed he saw in any kind of clear way? Or what he really just saw was a person moving and took upon himself to shoot that person? We don't know that because the car itself, or I think it's a van, a pickup truck, was returned to service, and the windshield was destroyed. Now that's a clear destruction of evidence, and the reason why it's so insulting, because any reasonable police officer, particularly a lieutenant, particularly an investigative person, would know that there's real value associated with that window, and that it's entirely conceivable that the other side, the law enforcement people or the civil rights people, would want to see that window and do their own testing on it. But that was destroyed. Again, to weaken the position that we may very well have. So we've seen this throughout, and as a consequence of this, as we couple this with the fact that this officer has had these other shootings, and Ben will go through these other shootings, and we don't see where he's ever been disciplined in any way. We've been involved in a bunch of other cases. We don't see where any of those officers have been disciplined. So the question is whether this department really condones the shootings, regardless of how badly it is, and ratifies it by failing to discipline them. To me, that's a pattern and practice of a culture that allows for misconduct to occur with no ramifications to the officers. So in this lawsuit, we have actually made a claim for Monell, which says we believe that there's a pattern and practice and a culture within this department that allows for this type of misconduct to occur, and that is often ratified by the command staff, and officers do not receive any discipline. These are the issues that are confronted in this case and some of the other cases we have, but it's front and center here because of the background of the particular officer. And so this is what the lawsuit that we have today. And so I'm going to have Ben on here to talk about the officer's background, and then I'll come back and have the family talk after that.
Thank you. So why is the officer's background important? Why is the fact that he had shot 3 other people, fired his gun 3 other times, that he's accounted for more than 10% of Vallejo Police Department's 32 shootings over the past 10 years? It's important for a lot of reasons. The first is, this is a trigger-happy officer and potentially a homicidal officer. But also, when he jumps out, the officer knows his body camera's on. He jumps out of the car. His first words out of his mouth, "What did he point at us?" Well, he doesn't know what he pointed at them. If he's asking that question, then, as if for the benefit of his body cam, as if he remembered, oh yeah, my body cam's on and people are going to look at this, he says, hey, he pointed a gun at us. We know that's not true. The chief said initially that the hammer, and it was a claw hammer, just a simple claw hammer, it was not an axe, it had no axe end. There are pictures of it online. It's a claw hammer. So when he says, hey, he pointed that axe, I thought that axe was a gun, there was no axe. But the police chief said that was in his sweatshirt pocket. Like a piece of it might have been poking out, as if to say that that somehow got mistaken for a gun. Really? I don't know if you can give the benefit of the doubt to an officer who has had 3 prior officer-involved shootings within literally 5 years. Those were in 2015, he fired his gun 18 times. And I don't even know how you do that unless you reload. He fires 18 times in 2 seconds while trying to arrest a person named Gerald Brown, who was allegedly in a stolen vehicle ramming this officer's car, if the allegations are true. Now, in 2017, he had 2 shootings 6 weeks apart. And don't you get placed on leave after a shooting? But in this case, what happens? Within 6 weeks, he's back on patrol. He has another shooting. So in 2017 in May, along with another officer who retired, a very notorious officer, Sean Kenny, they shot a man named Kevin DiCarlo while trying to serve an arrest warrant. Now, both of those men survived. 6 weeks later, while pursuing a suspected carjacker named Victor Hurtado in July 2017, Officer Tan fired 3 gunshots at him, and he survived. But it's not just the shootings, because in 2018, Officer Tan was sued for using excessive force against a man named Robert Strong. And what happened there? Robert Strong was trying to film a traffic stop that Officer Tan was involved in. Officer Tan put him in a chokehold and scraped his forehead on the ground. So as I understand it, that is still an active case. In any event, so he's accounted for 10% or so of the shootings at the City of Vallejo. So this is an officer who's experienced, and it's not just, he's not the only one who knows it. A Vallejo police captain at the scene who comes to the scene tells him on video, and if you watch the video, you'll hear this, you're gonna be all right, man. You've been through this before. So he's been through it before. So we think those words, hey, what did he point at us? Hey, he pointed a gun at us. Those are all for the benefit of the camera, because we know what did not happen. Mr. Monterossa, Sean, did not put a hammer back into his sweatshirt pocket after he was shot. And if he had both hands out, as the chief described, there was nothing in his hands because there's no other object. So this is a claw hammer, and it's not like the officer's responding to a report of shots fired. He's not responding to any crime that would indicate that there's a gun involved, potential looting. That's what it is. That's the allegation. And it's not that Mr. Monterossa is identified as a looter. I mean, the officer comes around, you can watch the video, it's literally seconds. And you have this officer in the van holding his AR-15, pointing it through the windshield, almost like he's just waiting for a target. So, is this a panicky officer? Is this a murderous officer? Is it a combination? Or is it an officer who just can't see straight? It could be all of those. What we do know, this police department did nothing, or nothing that we know of, nothing that's been exposed, and we know within 6 weeks of the second shooting, who was back on patrol to do the third shooting, this officer, apparently this department has done nothing to retrain to teach this officer how to do his job right and to protect the public. Because what he's doing right now, what they are doing, is putting members of the public at risk, and will not stand for that. And because of that, Mr. Monterossa was killed, and it's not acceptable, not in this society.
Thank you. Okay, at this moment, I'll bring the family up.
Will you please introduce yourselves?
Yeah. I'm Michelle Monterossa. I'm Sean's oldest sibling.
And I'm Ashley Monterossa. I'm Sean's younger sister.
Yeah, Ashley Michelle.
EY.
Well, thank you everyone for gathering here with us and the families who've been affected also by Vallejo Police Department to stand in solidarity with us. It's unfortunate that it took my brother's life to bring more light and national attention to how Vallejo has been doing this for years. Sean was not even read his rights. They didn't give my brother a chance. They just flat out assassinated my brother. Just like they assassinated Martin Luther King, a gunshot to the neck. It's an unfortunate thing that we have no moment to grieve. All we have to do is turn this pain to power and make sure that Sean's the last one in Vallejo, and that the public, the families here who are affected in Vallejo, have resources to help them, have funds to help them while they're surviving. Families who have been, their loved ones been murdered from 1997 to now, even the families before then. It's hard. We lost our only brother, and no one wants to be part of this family. But I'm so thankful that God put these people right next to us, because it's a longer fight. This is not the end. We'll do everything we can to make sure my brother gets justice. But what does justice mean? We need accountability. We need Shawnee Williams to fire the officer involved, Jared Ton. We need State Attorney Becerra to file these criminal charges against Jared Ton, Michael Nicholini, and also Gabriel Rodriguez.
Speak on.
We also need AG Javier Becerra to not just investigate the destruction of evidence, but also the entire murder of my brother, and also investigate the entire police department of Vallejo.
That's right.
Because it's redundant that Javier Becerra is only investigating the destruction of evidence, because it turns out to them the destruction of evidence is more important than murdering my brother.
And at the end of the day, Jared Ton was just out on that night. I'm sure other officers were. They were looking a way to bend their badge. They were looking for a way to assassinate an unarmed black man or Latino man.
Thank
Did
you.
they have a
Thank you.
barbecue after that? Question for the...
Let me finish what I'm going to do. We'll get back. Here's the mother and father.
Mom?
Mom speaks Spanish only.
Yeah. ¿Quieres hablar?
Later.
Let me, okay, what I want to show you, what I want to make sure I got here. These are exhibits I mentioned to you about the injury, the shooting that Sean received. I saw both of these right in the mid-lower neck, really round, very much consistent with an entry wound. Come on. This is in the back of the head, like here, right here. Okay? And that's a larger injury, more consistent with an exit wound. Now, we haven't seen the autopsy yet. And from there, we'll find out how the autopsy medical examiner reads his conclusion, but we'll have to have our own medical examiner examine it. But I know what we saw. And so, if he said that this is the exit wound in the back of the head, it really belies this whole question of where everyone was. Okay? Over here, we know that this is not the car itself, but we know the car was going this way, and we thought that Sean was coming this way, and we could not fathom how he could have been shot in the back of the head. Unless he turned his head, but we think that it's really more of a shot straight on, which makes a lot of sense to us, that the car is over in this location. And the thing that we have been trying to work through, and the reason why having the car being present for us to go and sit in the back seat and look through that window, because I really want to see the angle that a bullet would have traveled to get to Sean. For example, if Sean was where this reporter is, and he's down on his knees on a squat position, in order to get that angle, I don't know geometrics, you gotta do something to get that kind of angle for the neck. You can't be at the same level, you gotta, because he's up. So part of why we were so upset with the destruction of the windshield and the movement and the change, of the car, because it kind of prevented us from being able to do the work that I really would like to do and would have done, and I'll have to figure out some other kind of way to do it. Here's a picture of the windshield. You can see there's 5 shots. You can't see what's on the other side of it from here. You know that's the circle that the shot. This is a high-powered rifle, so you can imagine how fast it travels, right? Sean really was at the mercy, almost like he was Big Game Hunter attacking him. But that's what, and so I really wanted to see this, and I don't know if it was in a position that once I had it, I could see what you could see from it, and I just don't know that, and I'm very disappointed that that's not available and has not been available to us, because there are no videos that really describe what Sean was doing before he got shot. We don't have him in a attacking position, and we don't have him in a running position. From what the chief initially said, he was on his knees, that he was running and he stopped and went to his knees as if he was surrendering, and his hand was coming up like this, and he gets shot. So the destruction of that evidence is very, very disturbing to us, and particularly by a senior police officer who is a lieutenant, or we've been told, 2 of them, 2 lieutenants. One's investigator, head of investigation, and the other is the head of the union. Now, there's no way that those individuals, given their experience and the positions that they have, did not know, reasonably would have known, that these items were evidence. And as evidence, we had an opportunity, even the Attorney General, City Attorney, or the DA would want to have seen it, and to suggest that it has no value or that we can give you photographs is totally ridiculous. Because the best evidence for us to do our examination and to do our work is having the original window glass. And that was taken from us. Over here we have, this is just an overview of Walgreens. You may have known this, but we got this from the videos. So that's the car, and we believe Sean was in that particular area. But we also know there was a distance. It wasn't like he was on top of the car. He was some distance away, which then meant that the police were in a position to assess what was in front of them and to make some quick decisions about what to do. The only option was not to shoot. So that's why we're so upset about what happened here, because just taking some time to calibrate and to assess what was in front of them, they could have made a decision not to take this boy's life. And because this officer, in my view, was a panicky guy, he had been involved in 3 other shootings, that he was scared to death about any little thing, he was shooting at anything that moved, and with a rifle, that is unconscionable for me. So we have filed this lawsuit, and family, you guys ready or not? So I'm going to ask you some questions. I can answer the question. Huh?
I'll translate.
Come on, Derek, come on.
Quiero dar gracias a Dios por todos los que nos han acompañado tanto tiempo.
She said she wants to thank everyone, and she wants to thank God for all of us gathering here, and she wants to thank you all for the support and the continuous support for the last 2 months.
A nuestros abogados les doy
She
gracias.
wants to thank
Aquí,
our lawyers.
maravillosas personas para llevar este caso.
She says everyone here and our lawyers are marvelous people to take this case where it needs to go.
Y quiero aprovechar esta oportunidad
And she wants to take advantage of this opportunity
para hablarle al señor Javier Becerra
to address Xavier Becerra
que tome este caso.
to take on this case.
No solamente se puede ayudar a la gente o pedir algo cuando uno necesita un voto.
She says you can't always ask your people to vote for you.
Pero este es el momento que él se levante con un nombre de autoridad
But this is the moment where A.G. Becerra steps up like a real man and takes on the case.
y ponga mano dura este caso.
And to put his foot down and take on this case like a real person.
Dios pone al hombre en alto, pero Dios lo quita y lo baja muy bajo.
And she said God can put someone on a pedestal but take them off real quick.
Así que, wake up, man, wake up. Levántate, Javier Becerra.
Okay.
What I say, I'm saying thank you for everybody to be here. I really like the support for everybody. And John, thank you.
Ben.
Thank you for really this 2 months very bad for us, but the support for everybody like you give it a lot of power for us and help a lot. And we're here for support the rest of the people, not only for my son. We need a justice for the rest. We don't want our kid to be killed. Black, Latino, anybody. We are America. We are not people only they're looking for us for the election. We want the justice for everybody. And in November, they're gonna know about us, okay, for everybody. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Before I answer the question,
Mr. Burris, in the lawsuit you said that the officer had a, quote, shocking history of shooting his gun at civilians. And then you mentioned nearly 36 police shootings in the last decade. Beyond Sean Monterossa, what message do you hope this lawsuit?
well, this message, part of the lawsuit is to look at these other shootings. I mean, we have other cases to look at these other shootings to see whether or not there was any discipline given to any of these officers, whether or not they were reviewed in such a way that would send a clear message to the officers that that conduct was unacceptable. So from our point of view, we want to look at these cases to determine whether or not there is a culture of supporting police shootings when it's unjustified. And part of that is there's a legal concept called Manel, where you're looking at a pattern and practice of policing in a particular city. And in this particular case, we're looking at the question of whether or not the use of deadly force, there's a pattern and culture within the department to allow for deadly force to be used in ways that is not justified. That's an important concept for us, one that we want to hopefully get a handle on with the department. We have a judge, Judge Nunley, in federal court, I think, that will give us leeway in doing the discovery here. It's a big challenge, but it's one that for the future of the city, but more in future for the other black and brown kids out here that we do not want to wind up the same way. And this case has to be an instrument to try to attack that particular problem and hopefully bring about some kind of reform in this era of reckoning. The question is whether, and you will hear I've said this before, whether it's a moment that we are now or is this a movement. This case can be a movement to deal with the moment of the shooting itself, but also this is an opportunity for all cities that have had some problems that they've coddled officers to take a closer look at it and not be so protective of offending the police union. It's an opportunity to evaluate the practices that have taken place in the city. So I view this as an opportunity for them to come to the table and see if we can make Vallejo a better police department by holding officers accountable and putting forth guidelines and let them know what their responsibilities are and that they're being held to those. That part can only happen if the police chief and his command staff are prepared to do that. But that is our objective.
Again, John, what do you think of the number of shootings that this department has had, and is it time for a federal monitor to come in?
Well, number one, the number of shootings is totally outrageous. It is well beyond the pale. It is partly the reason why we have this number of cases we have in Vallejo now, and that all of them appear to be improper shooting cases. And I will say we have other cases that are beating cases or false arrest cases, but the shooting cases are totally outrageous. And it seems that there's no effort to discipline, to haul these officers into any kind of discipline in and about the time that it takes place. So it is unconscionable. Now, the question is, what ultimately can be the result here? It certainly could be that at the end of the day, there's a monitor, reach some kind of consent decree or an agreement as to what needs to be done. That means, like we had to do in other places, to revise the policies and then have the training on the policies and then to try to hold them accountable to it. And that's what a monitor could be: a state monitor, federal monitor, could be a private monitor that has the responsibility of ensuring that the modifications and the reforms that have been prepared are followed. That's a task. That's a real task. But if you're going to make real changes here, you got to have something like that to say that the officers can be held accountable and the command staff will be responsible if they're not being held accountable. That's also a political will question as well. That is, to the city council, to the mayor, city manager, or any of these people prepared to hold the department accountable and try to find a new way, a way that cuts these shootings down, cut these false arrests down, and make the people of this community, the black and brown communities, feel that the justice they get from the police department is even. It's not uneven. And that's a challenge that I see that we're going to face, not only in this case, but some of the others, but is one that must be met and must be challenged. This is not a moment. It could be a movement. This case could be at the center part of that. The city will then have to decide whether they're prepared to work for a movement as opposed to one off on a case. We hope not. Okay? I want to say one point I want to clarify here, and that is because over here we have the car and Sean's body. That's where it ended, in this about number of feet. The shooting did not start here. The shooting did not start here. The shooting started back here. And the car continued to move forward as the shootings were taking place. So he was actually much further away. And that's the shocking part about it. He was farther away, and he started shooting, and he continued to shoot. So to us, it's the most egregious type of conduct, and it may very well be just because this officer is a panicky person, despicable conduct from my point of view, because of the history that he has. This is a situation where the police department itself should have taken this man's gun away from him a while ago. He should not be on the streets of Vallejo policing the community with a gun. Desk job if you're going to keep him, but certainly keep him away from the street, and particularly against black and brown people.
Thank you.
Okay? Now find a neighborhood where they're not black and brown people and let him do that. But he clearly is not a person who should be in a black and brown community.
The question, though, is right now we don't know who the next person that he's going to shoot or kill is. We don't know when that will happen, but the odds are very good. There is going to be another person, and probably more than one if it keeps it up. You can't keep this officer on the street. Get him off the street, show some guts.
But the message also is not just for this officer, it's for all officers there. We recognize this is a city that's controlled by the police union. And somehow the message has got to get to them that they cannot participate in coddling police officers like this. As this guy says, the captain says, you've been here before, it's going to all be all right. That is a message that clearly has been sent to this officer before. It's going to be all right, don't worry about it. We got your back, don't worry.
Mr.
And
Burris,
that's what we are.
You said earlier that there was not, there was only one body cam video?
No, I think there was, there may have been a lot more body cams. We don't have a body cam of the actual position that Sean was in at the time he was shot. We now know that there were other cameras around because they released them, you know. But the odd portion of all this is that despite all these body cameras and stuff of this nature, there was no body camera for the actual conduct that Sean was engaging in at the time he got shot. That is despicable and unconscionable to me.
Question for Sean's sisters, and my condolences to your family. If you don't mind stepping up to the microphone. But, it's one thing to find out what happened to your brother. It's another to find out this officer, as is alleged in the lawsuit, has been involved in 3 previous shootings, and that there have been 32 shootings that they have bent badges. In the totality, what goes through your mind and your family's mind that all of this is part of the picture?
I think that it's unfortunate to say what I'm going to say. I think this is divine timing and this had to happen. And Sean's a martyr and martyrs never die, but however, Sean died for a greater cause. Sean died from being from San Francisco and being murdered out here in Vallejo. He brought so much light, and thanks to Open Vallejo as well, they're doing their podcast, they're writing their articles, and they're doing all this investigation to bring what the whole entire community from Vallejo has known for years. However, it's now finally being in a microscope, and the whole country is watching Vallejo.
But also, just want to clarify something. Our family is the one who did the actual investigation ourselves. When Sean, we shared locations with him. So we came out here the night that he was murdered asking for questions. The Vallejo Police Department had us do a wild goose chase, but there's other cases around the world that already happens. So for us, we did our own investigation. We were notified, not really, John was the one who helped us be notified 38 hours afterwards when Shawnee Williams gave a press release.
The only time Vallejo ever tried to reach out to us was when Detective Kevin Rose from Vallejo called Michelle on June 2nd during the daytime to try to get a statement before the press conference, before Shawnee Williams' first press conference. And that was the only thing they ever reached out to us for.
What goes through your mind that there have been all these other things, the badges,
It's horrific. It's a sickening tradition they do. I'm sure we don't know how many, but we know there are a total of the fatal 14. There are 14 officers that are still employed by Vallejo Police Department who have gotten away with murder, continue to murder people, but continue to traumatize the communities of Vallejo, but more predominantly the Latino and Black community of Vallejo.
What do you say to those officers?
Your time is up. I mean, eventually your downfall is coming and all of you will be locked up soon enough. But, we can't do reform without taking everyone from Vallejo and just the city of Vallejo in general away from here. We need to elect and vote for people that are actually here for the entire community.
People who are actually from the community. The mayor of Vallejo is also a former police. So it's just been going on for years. They've all been covering the tracks here, We just found out that he was an ex-officer, so it trickles down that they've been doing this for years and they know all how to cover each other.
And it's a systematic issue and it needs to end now.
Ahora en español les pregunto, disculpen primero lo que sucedió, pero si nos pueden explicar qué está pasando por su mente en estos momentos y qué quieren que haya cambio en esta ciudad y en el departamento de policía de Vallejo.
Pues ahora le damos gracias a Dios por darnos la fortaleza de estar aquí paradas y pudiendo hablar y presentarnos en una manera poderosa. Es algo bien duro y siendo mi hermano asesinado es un dolor bien fuerte, pero estamos tomando este dolor a un poder, que Sean sea el último que muera en Vallejo, pero también que muera en California. Han sido 3 latinos matados en 3 semanas y Gavin Newsom no ha dicho nada. Tuvo que ser Sean Monterossa, después Eric Salgado y después Andrés Guardado. ¿Cuántos más?
Y el hecho de que ustedes ahora saben también que el policía, el oficial, tenía un historial también, ¿cómo les hace sentir eso? Que su hermano no fue el único también.
Pues eso demuestra cómo es el sistema policial, que ellos dejan que esos policías después de un asesinato siguen matando gente y no hay consecuencias para ellos.
Y también demuestra que cada departamento de policía los encubre. Como Jared Hunt tuvía todas estas cosas en Galt, por Sacramento, después los mandan a Vallejo, a una ciudad más pequeño y callado, para que sigan haciendo las atrocidades que están haciendo y para que la gente esté en silencio. Pero ahora ya basta y todo lo que está hecho en la oscuridad sale a la luz por la gracia de Dios.
Muchas gracias, mi más sentido pésame.
Gracias.
All right, thank all of you for coming. Oh, yeah.
I have one more question.
Oh, one question.
Okay.
For the Manel charge, what is the recent story from Open Vallejo and the badge bending? Does that help that at all to outline the culture and history?
I think that the badge bending is a cultural issue. It shows a lack of regard for the human lives that they've taken, and as opposed to being sorrowful, they're joyful. That is undercurrent of to me, a department and members of that department that has no respect for human life or limited. So therefore, it becomes important as part of the Manel type issue. We don't know who in fact was, but to the extent the issue exists, we'll have to get to see how it impacts upon the Manel issue here. Okay? Okay?
Any
Thank all
thoughts
of you.
on the new releases of Willie McCoy's new videos?
Well, I'm not doing an interview on William McCoy today. We have to talk about that next. Okay? This is Monterossa today. All right, thank you.
Everybody, this was the press conference.
We'll do the groundwork and doing everything.
Can you leave that up just for a second?
Can you guys leave the pictures up, please?
We gotta get some B-roll. All right.
We'll have to motivate him.
Oh, you mean that?
No, it's all right. You're fine.